Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove. I'm back today with another Omnibus review, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Batman Nightfall Omnibus Volume 1. So the Nightfall event, which is collected across 3 Omnibus volumes, is probably one of the most famous, well-known Batman events from his long history. And back in 2017, DC started to collect it in these Omnibus editions, which was great news because it means that as of these being printed, for the first time, this full event was available in collected editions. Prior to this, it had been out in, I think, various trade paperback collections. But besides from having every single issue, it had never been printed in its entirety, at least not to my knowledge. So the omnibuses, volumes 1, 2, and 3, a great way to collect the full thing. Really the best way to do it, in my opinion. And today I'm going to take a look through the first volume. And then, down the line in future videos, I'll take a look at volumes 2 and 3 as well. So, first thing I'll just talk about is the dust jacket. Now, with this volume and with volumes 2 and 3, the artwork for these dust jackets was done by Kelly Jones, who was the artist who worked on a lot of the covers from the content that's originally published and collected in here. So he came back and he did some brand new artwork specifically for these editions, which on one hand is really cool. I think it's nice that he came back and did that, given that he was associated with the original event. However, and it's a fairly big however, in my opinion, the artwork on these dust jackets is just not great. I just don't particularly like it. I mean, this one's actually okay, to be fair. I don't have much of an issue with this one so much on this first volume, but the other two, yeah, not as good. But the main problem I have with this, and with the other two as well together, is the fact that DC chose to use the full wraparound image on the spine itself, meaning the spines basically just mismatch completely and look utterly bizarre next to each other on the shelf. And it's just, I think, pretty awful design choice overall. So yeah, not great. They don't look great together on the shelf, I have to say. But I suppose really it's the content that matters, and it doesn't bug me too much, but I felt I had to point it out just because it is weird and it's not great, and I can see and fully understand why it does bother some people. But yeah, so decent artwork, and it is cool that Kelly Jones came back. On the back here you do get a little summary of the event, as well as the material collected down there, which you can have a look at. But basically you're getting the first third of the whole thing, and Nightfall is really split up into 3 key sections, and therefore it fits into 3 omnibus. The first part in here is probably the most famous part of the story, and I am going to talk about the story in a fair amount of detail as I flick through here. Really like the bookend pages in all 3 of these volumes, though, I'll say that straight away. Really nice images chosen for those. So I'm going to give a spoiler warning here, guys, because even though this is a very famous event, chances are you know about the key details of it, to some extent at least. If you have any familiarity with Batman at all, you probably know some of this. But even so, as I am going to discuss quite a few plot points, I think it's only fair to give that warning just in case. But as I say, I'm probably not going to go over anything that you don't already know. But anyway, if you do want to go ahead and read the whole thing and experience it for yourself, then I totally get that. But otherwise, if you're already familiar with the event or just not bothered about spoilers, as always, stick around, we'll go through it. And we start here with Batman Vengeance of Bane, number 1. Now, I think this is a really good place to start the story off. I'll talk a little bit about something that you don't get in this omnibus in a minute, which is a fairly strange omission. But basically, Vengeance of Bane, so this is, as you might expect, an origin story for Bane, who of course is going to feature as the main villain, the main antagonist certainly throughout this part of the story that's collected in this book. He doesn't feature too much in the stuff in volumes 2 and 3, but in here he's definitely playing a very prominent role, and he's newly introduced, so he was a brand new character created for this event, and I think was a strong character in terms of how he was presented and what we see of him. He was set up well to be a kind of, already from the beginning, to set up he was set up to be a potentially great Batman villain, I would say. So basically, he was born in a prison, he grew up in that prison, and pretty much dedicated himself to trying to perfect himself physically, mentally, and he ended up just becoming a kind of amazing badass guy, really. It's like, and then he got involved with an experimental treatment using venom. And again, you know, anyone with any familiarity with Bane probably well aware of his connection to this venom drug and what that does, but essentially it's pumped into his body and it makes him super strong. In a nutshell, that is what it's all about. So Bane breaks out of this prison in the end, forms a gang of people loyal to him, and he kind of just gets it in his head that he needs to go to Gotham City and take down Batman. He ends up with a kind of obsession with defeating Batman. There is a reason for it presented in here, but essentially he wants to go there, prove that he is superior, take down this great protector of Gotham City, and replace him in a way. Not as the protector, but as the guy in charge. He kind of sees it as though if he takes down Batman, Gotham is his for the taking, effectively. And that is what the bulk of this story ends up being. It's Bane's plot to bring down Batman, which is honestly very clever. Simple, but what he does makes a lot of sense, which you can't always say about supervillain schemes. But he doesn't rush straight into a fight with Batman. He is very cunning and intelligent in his approach, and I think that is a key part of what makes Bane a good character, even from this very early stage, is the fact that he wasn't created to be purely one-dimensional. He isn't just a strong guy who turns up, beats Batman in a fight, and it's as simple as that. It's a lot more kind of complex than that, really, in a way, or at least a lot more interesting. Because what Bane ends up doing is he's observing Batman from the shadows, kind of analysing his style, his technique, trying to just learn about his enemy before he rushes into a fight. He's doing his research, you know, it makes sense. It's what you'd probably do in that situation. And he decides, ultimately, that he orchestrates a mass breakout from Arkham Asylum, releasing many of the key supervillains Batman has a history with, so releasing them all at once, and therefore forcing Batman to kind of run a gauntlet of fighting so many of his enemies, one after the other, and pushing him to the point of mental and physical exhaustion. And that's what you're seeing throughout many of these issues here. You're seeing Batman take on just one villain after another. You know, it's just non-stop. And you've got, for example, Alfred, you've got Robin, who is Tim Drake at this point. Tim Drake, newly introduced as Robin at this point. And both of them basically saying to him, you know, you've got to stop, you've got to have a break. You know, even Batman needs a rest. You're pushing yourself too hard. And obviously Bruce Wayne, being the obsessive, compulsive maniac he is, really, just refuses to stop. You know, he's got it in his head that only he can possibly do this, and he has to do it, you know, now. Batman doesn't take breaks as far as he's concerned, even though as the issues go on, you see here he is noticeably getting worse and worse as the exhaustion sets in. He starts struggling more and more in these fights against these guys he's going against, and you know, his margin of victory becomes more and more narrow. He's only just about able to get over the line in some of these fights. And you see, you know, panels like this, for example, great ways of illustrating, literally, the fatigue setting in, just the absolute, like I say, just exhaustion and extreme extent to which he's pushing himself. And then, you know, what you ultimately get is Bane, finally, when the time is right, from his point of view, stepping in and confronting Batman. Through here, you know, you're getting, as with any kind of crossover events, a variety of artists and writers. I will say that the standout artist for me during this whole era is Jim Apato's work. So Jim Aparo, an artist who had quite a long association with Batman already up to this point, and when he's drawing it, I think it just looks Just slightly better really than the others, but I didn't dislike any of the artwork in here. It's got quite a sort of 90s style. I mean, it is an event from the 90s, so that's to be expected. But I think it's really cool overall. I really do like all of the artwork that features in, I think, the entire Nightfall saga. You know, not just this book, but I mean in volumes 2 and 3 as well. So I think it's primarily the issues of Batman itself that are being illustrated by Jim Aparo. So you're getting, for example, his work in this issue. And of course I need to mention this new character, so Azrael. I mentioned there was something that's not collected in here, which is a bit of a strange thing to leave out, and that is there's a storyline called Sword of Azrael, which is the origin story of Azrael, and kind of shows his introduction and how Batman came to know him and why he's around at this point. Because the thing is, you've got this guy here, he's called, well, his real name is Jean-Paul Valley, and this is him in this very odd looking weird black costume. Because what's going on during this whole time, whilst Batman's fighting his one-man war against every supervillain ever, you've got Robin tasked with training Jean-Paul Valley to kind of bring him into the war on crime, I suppose, and have him be another ally, effectively, for the Batman family, the Bat family. Cool splash page there. Yeah, so he's very much kind of learning, but the thing about him is he's quite an interesting, complex character, this Jean-Paul Valley. He was trained as an assassin, basically, kind of from a very young age, I think pretty much from being a baby. He was kind of subliminally trained, all these kinds of psychological conditioning and stuff he was put through from a very young age. So he's kind of got this part of him, really, that he doesn't have complete control over. Part of him that works as at least that functions like an assassin for this secret order called the Order of Saint-Dumas. The long and short of it meaning that he's not necessarily trustworthy in a way. He's a bit unpredictable. But you get a lot of villains approaching in here, and as I say, it's the way that Bane is kind of working from the shadows. He's got a very good plan. Honestly, I think it works. It works really well within this story. You know, for example, this is a cool bit here where he goes to see the Riddler. He actually fires some venom at the Riddler and bulks him up, basically, to make him a particularly tough opponent for Batman to fight. Yeah, it's just good, I think, refreshing to read a story where the villain is actually doing something logical. You know what I mean? Something that actually makes sense. So many times supervillain schemes are just frustratingly stupid from a reading point of view. It can damage the reading experience. I'm not saying, obviously, this is the best ever villain scheme, and I'm not saying there aren't plenty of other good examples, but I think especially if you read, like I do, a lot of Silver and Bronze Age comics where villains can do particularly weird things, this sort of stuff is just, it makes a lot more sense. There's a cool page here of Batman kind of looking at the different villains who are still out and causing chaos. He's effectively working his way down the list of people he needs to take down. It can be a little bit frustrating, though, this story, in terms of, as much as Bane's plan does make sense from his perspective, Batman's kind of extreme stubbornness, which is by no means exclusive to this story. In fact, it's pretty much a key part of Batman's entire character and who he is. But that kind of determination, that almost arrogance, that ignorance to the fact that he could do with help, you know, and the thing is that he actually has people that he himself was specifically trained to help him out, you know, Nightwing, Robin, Batgirl, depending on, you know, what continuity you're in anyway, who could help him, and so many times he just turns them away and he's kind of like, no, this, you know, I can do this by myself. And it's really that key aspect of his personality that is his own downfall in here, because if he accepted help from others, in this storyline, if he wasn't so determined to do every single thing all by himself, then he wouldn't necessarily be defeated in the end in the way he is. But obviously that's a key part of the story, really. So again, you know, it all makes sense within the story being told. You also get the introduction of this character here, this doctor. I can't remember her full name, Chandra I think she's called. She ends up being important more so after the events in this book, but still during the Nightfall event as a whole. She starts to get close to Bruce Wayne. He grows close to her. They grow close to each other, however you want to phrase that. But, you know, I just think hopefully as I flip through here, you get an idea of the scale of this storyline, you know, just the sheer amount of characters that were being involved, villains in particular, you know. It is understandable as to why Batman gets just so completely beat down after taking on so many of these one after the other. You know, Poison Ivy here, another example. This is a really good story, I think. I kind of know that it's not something everybody enjoys as a storyline. I think some people just dismiss it as just another 90s crossover in an era of too many crossovers and big events. And I get that more so with what ends up happening after this. You know, in the second volume, certainly I have issues with that. But this particular volume, everything collected in here, I think this is a really strong story overall, to be honest. It's actually one of my favourite Batman stories altogether. So, you know, this first volume at the very least, I think, is well worth checking out. Not least of all because it's just one of those super iconic storylines. You know, it still gets referenced to this day. You know, I mean, it's a few years ago now, obviously, but even The Dark Knight Rises, the Christopher Nolan film, took a lot of inspiration from this story, at least in a few key elements of it. And yeah, so here's the culmination of everything that's been going on through this book up to this point. You know, Batman very much on the verge of just being absolutely broken. And then, fittingly enough, he comes home only to find Bane in his house, finally waiting for him to confront him one-on-one. Because he's worked out his identity, and that's, you know, something else that Bane has managed to do. He has worked out pretty quickly, pretty easily, that Bruce Wayne is Batman. So he's made it here to the Wayne Manor, confronts him in this incredibly famous issue, this incredibly famous fight sequence. Batman just completely gets his ass kicked in here. It's brutal, quite honestly. You know, if you know, it's not something you're used to seeing Batman get so easily and completely destroyed in a fight. But that's exactly how it goes down, and it all ends, of course, with just about one of the most famous, iconic panels of all time, I've got to say, where Bane literally breaks the bat, just throws him down, breaks his back across his leg. Yeah. And leaves him literally broken. And that, obviously, you know, not so much shocking now, so many years after the fact, and most people are aware of this story. But, yeah, certainly a key part of Batman history, nevertheless. And, as I say, the way it's depicted is really quite brutal, because then you got the next issue where Bane literally throws this broken Batman off a roof onto the streets below. And to say that Bruce Wayne's in bad shape would really be an understatement at this point. So this is the whole saga now where Bruce Wayne is out of the picture for the most part. His back is broken, he's paralysed. He's not Batman anymore from this point onwards, and it leaves the big question mark as to, you know, who's going to take that mantle? Who is going to take Batman's place? And again, no surprise to anybody who's already familiar with this story, but the guy who steps into the Batsuit is the recently introduced, unpredictable, and quite frankly, the obviously not a very good choice for the job, Jean-Paul Valley / Azrael. He ends up getting given the job. Now, the story does kind of address the fact that you would think that the most obvious candidate and the best suited candidate to take the job of Batman, if Bruce Wayne's not going to do it, would be Dick Grayson, who was Nightwing at this time. But there is at least some explanation given from Bruce Wayne, which again is flawed logic on his part. He doesn't, basically I think he says he doesn't want to burden Dick Grayson with it. They weren't particularly on good terms during this time, I think. But nevertheless, the decision to give it to this guy who is really pretty much still a stranger is like one of those obvious bad decisions. And I think it's no great spoiler to say that it doesn't ultimately work out with Azrael as Batman. But that's what you're getting at the back of this book anyway. So Azrael takes on the Bat Mantle. Initially he's wearing the same bat suit, but what he starts to do pretty quickly is he has these kinds of visions, which are all part of his mental conditioning from the Order of Saint Dumas, that kind of send him into an almost, like this kind of subconscious state where he creates weapons and armor for himself based on designs that he kind of sees in these visions. And what that means effectively is that he ends up redesigning the Batsuit in his own very unique way. And we start to see that right at the very end. So Batman, at this point, Batman being Azrael, he's taking down a lot of the villains, becoming increasingly brutal. His attitude changes. So initially he is trying to just completely emulate Bruce Wayne and what he was like as Batman. And he's kind of worried about, is he good enough to be Batman? Does he deserve the mantle and the trust that Bruce Wayne has put in him? And that attitude kind of quickly shifts into, well, obviously I deserve it. I'm the best person for it. In fact, I'm better than Bruce Wayne was. I'm going to be Batman in my own way. I'm going to be a better Batman. And yeah, he starts to get more brutal, starts to, beat criminals more and more savagely. And in the end here, he ends up having a fight with Bane. I think Bruce Wayne specifically said, don't take on Bane. That's the one thing I'd forbid you to do. But after this new attitude starts setting into him, Jean-Paul's just like, well, obviously I'm going to take on Bane. I'm better than you were anyway, so I can beat Bane. You get his redesigned gauntlets in here. That's the first part of the new costume with these sharp talons and grappling hooks that fire out of it. It's all pretty cool. The sequence of events in here, genuinely really interesting story, I think. The way it all ends up kind of happening. Certainly I would say overall the whole thing is a stronger event, stronger storytelling than the nearest possible comparison I can think of, which would be the death and return of Superman story. I do like that story, I have a real soft spot for it, but I've got to say I think Nightfall is better. And then he starts to kick Robin out. So he kind of tells Tim that he doesn't want him in his life, that he doesn't need a Robin as Batman. Batman does continue to be, Tim does continue to be Robin and kind of operate on his own. But yeah, so we see here Robin discovering the plans for the Batsuit and then the debut of the Azbat-suit, as it's typically known. Yeah, which is it's interesting, I'll say that. It's very 90s, obviously. This kind of idea of superheroes wearing armor, like powered, like battle suits like this. It was a very 90s trend that lasted for a little while. So it's very much of its time. It's an interesting design, and it does serve to literally visually represent that this guy is going to be a very different version of Batman to what we're used to. And of course, really from this point on, the point of the story, increasingly so, being to just make it more and more obvious that this guy's not right for Batman and that we need the real Batman back. And that's really where the story goes after this. But he does beat Batman. He beats Bane, I should say. Manages to defeat him, and as far as he's concerned at that point, proven himself to be the one true Batman. And that's where the story leaves us. So with this new Batman now on the prowl, Bruce Wayne out of the picture, and Tim Drake as Robin very concerned about what's going to happen now, given the state of affairs at that point. In the back, you're getting some different character sketches and various extras, covers, character designs, pretty cool stuff. And then in the back, tell you these covers, really nice. These book page covers, back end covers, or whatever you call them. So overall, this particular volume, I think, pretty strong and worth checking out for anybody interested in it. I think the first volume, this one, is still available in print, or at least it's not too hard to find. I think of the three, volume 3 is the one that's now very hard to get a hold of. Pretty sure you can still get 1 and 2 without too much trouble. And I do recommend checking this one out. And certainly, if you do enjoy it, I think the rest of the event would be enjoyable to you as well. I think this is the strongest of the three, but it does all work well as one complete story. And if you enjoy what's going on in here, it only makes sense to carry on and read what comes next. But yeah, anyway, thanks as always for checking the video out, for watching through. Appreciate your time as always. And if you want to leave a like on the video, comment below, let me know what you think about Nightfall, about these omnibus editions in particular. I'm always happy to chat about anything like that. But other than that, thanks again, guys. I'll be back again soon with another video.